President Donald Trump has defended his record on North Korea and talked up hopes towards his next meeting with Kim Jong-un. The summit seems to be getting closer, but the details of how far along they're in their denuclearization talks remain a mystery. We'll scrutinize this situation further later in the program. But first, we turn to Devin Whiting at the News Center for the latest headlines. Devin?
Hi, Jung-ho. First, the issue of how South Korea and the U.S. will share the cost of stationing American troops here, some 28,000 of them. The Blue House in Seoul has rejected reports that Presidents Moon and Trump have discussed the specific contributions each side will make. In a text message to reporters, President Moon's spokesperson said reports that President Trump demanded during last year's G20 summit that Seoul shoulder a far greater proportion of defense costs, up to $1.2 billion US, were simply incorrect. He added that neither President Trump nor any other world leader would speak in such a manner, saying such false reporting could greatly insult the U.S. president. Earlier reports suggested Trump may have pressed President Moon to pay at least $1 billion for the U.S. troops' deployment on the peninsula. South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa, who's in Davos for the World Economic Forum, is urging North Korea to make firm pledges on denuclearization during the next Pyongyang-Washington summit. Kang said those pledges should include dismantling its main nuclear complex and allowing inspectors from outside to confirm the process. Speaking to Reuters, Kang said she's optimistic that North Korea will agree to take concrete steps to scrap its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The North's economy, she said, will never improve unless the regime takes such steps. The chief nuclear negotiators of the U.S. and China met in Washington this week to discuss the latest developments related to North Korea. The U.S. State Department has confirmed that talks were held on Wednesday between U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun, and Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Kong Xuanyou. The two sides discussed efforts towards achieving the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea, while emphasizing the importance of keeping the sanctions on the North in place. China and Thailand are already using cloud seeding technology to tackle air pollution, and Korea is going to follow their lead to hopefully get rid of some of the fine dust pollution it's been battling for years. Hong Yu reports.
South Korea is launching a pilot program on Friday that aims to create artificial rain to try and help reduce fine dust. The Korea Meteorological Administration and the Ministry of Environment explained that planes will fly over the western coastline of Gyeonggi-do Province, spraying clouds with silver iodide that causes water droplets to form. China, with an advanced technology for creating artificial rain, found out that more than 10 millimeters of rainfall is needed over a 3-hour period to see a 10% reduction of ultrafine dust density. This means that the amount of rain that can be created is what matters in an artificial rain test. But China, even with its artificial rain-producing missiles and tanks, is struggling to increase precipitation. Thailand, on the other hand, sprayed 3,000 liters of water into the air but failed to see any effect. Then they moved to using drones to make rain. For Korea, the days that such tests can be carried out are rare because when fine dust settles over the country, there are no rain clouds as the atmosphere is under the influence of an anticyclone. So it's important to customize the technology for Korea's climatic properties. On Friday, the density of fine dust will be measured after cloud seeding starts producing rain. The results of the first test will be announced on Monday. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Turning to the economy, the volume of South Korea's exports rose for the third consecutive month in December of last year, but import volume dropped sharply. The country's terms of trade declined by 6.8% on year as imports became more expensive due to fluctuations in global oil prices, while the prices fetched by exports dropped. Data by the Bank of Korea on Friday show export volume last month edged up 0.2% compared to the same period the year before. The volume of imports dropped 3.1% on year on a slump in shipments of machinery goods related to semiconductors. Korea's benchmark Dubai crude surged last month by 7.8% on year to trade at about 65 US dollars. South Korea's consumer sentiment rose slightly in January for a second straight month. The Bank of Korea says the monthly consumer sentiment index climbed 0.6 points on month to 97.5. The central bank attributed the rise to households' expectations for the government's economic revitalization policies and the resumption of U.S.-China trade talks. However, the reading has remained below 100 for 4 straight months, meaning there are more pessimists than optimists about the local economy. South Korea reclaimed the top spot in global shipbuilding orders last year for the first time since 2011, thanks to more contracts for LNG carriers. The Trade Ministry says combined, South Korean shipbuilders won orders last year of around 12.6 million compensated gross tons, up from the previous year's figure of 7.6 million. That accounts for more than 44% of global orders in 2018. The ministry attributed the spike to local shipbuilders winning more contracts for high-value ships, such as liquefied natural gas carriers and very large crude carriers. Later this month, Korean companies will be holding what's been billed as the Korean version of CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, a big annual event in Las Vegas. Some media reports have claimed the show in Seoul was organized on the orders of the presidential office, but today the Blue House officially said that is not true. Presidential spokesman Kim Jong-un said that the event at Dongdaemun Design Plaza starting on January 29th was organized on the initiative of private companies. Korean firms that took part in this year's CES in Las Vegas, he said, had proposed that Seoul hold a show of its own. The spokesman explained that the event will help promote Korean technologies that were introduced in Las Vegas to buyers here at home and will enable locals to check out new technologies too. Making the Korean headlines in recent weeks has been sexual violence in sports. There have been allegations of physical and sexual abuse in speed skating, judo, and taekwondo. Today, the sports ministry has revealed some measures it's going to take to put a stop to it. Won Jung-hwan has this report.
At a meeting of the Sports, Education and Gender Ministries on Friday, the Ministry of Sports gave more concrete details of its proposed measures to deal with the recent sexual abuse revelations in sporting circles.
Human rights violations in sports have not improved even after some overall inspections over the last 10 years. We are deeply to blame for being blind on human rights violations toward young people in the country, and we are putting measures in place to prevent this from happening again.
Firstly, led by the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, the ministry is launching a special investigation team for sexual abuse cases. The special team will begin their work by conducting an independent investigation of past cases and a fact-finding probe that will eventually lead to sports policy improvements. The second move is to strengthen disciplinary measures against perpetrators in sporting circles. The ministry said it will revise the related regulations to foster an environment that doesn't jeopardize victims' careers when they speak out. While the ministry seeks permanent expulsion for any perpetrators if needed, it said that any other personnel in sporting bodies attempting to cover up or downplay incidents will also be punished, possibly even with jail time. Lastly, the ministry will launch a committee to overhaul the elite sporting system so that athletes have more protection and brutal training practices are halted. It pointed out that in order to eradicate sexual violence, there's a need to conduct a comprehensive review of the system that focuses on fostering elite athletes through fierce competition. The sports ministry first laid out its plans to root out sexual violence in sporting circles on the 9th of this month. Now that the ministry has come up with these detailed measures, it needs to put them in place as soon as it can in order to create a safer environment for the nation's athletes. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
After hearing criticisms that there's been little to no progress on Pyongyang's denuclearization for months, US President Donald Trump defended his North Korea policy, pointing out the successes he's had with the regime. He's also emphasized the friendly ties he's made with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and raised expectations for their next meeting. Lee Ji-won has this report.
U.S. President Donald Trump insists there has been progress in talks with North Korea, adding he expects another good summit with the regime's leader. In a flurry of tweets on Thursday, President Trump said the media, which he described as, quote, fake news, has unfairly accused him of producing few tangible results on the regime's denuclearization since the first summit in Singapore last June. He said the evaluation is wrong and that from 40 years of doing nothing and being at the brink of war, has built a relationship, brought back home hostages and Korean War remains, stopped rockets or missiles being fired, and most importantly, stopped nuclear testing, all in just 15 months. Trump said this is more than anything anyone else had accomplished with the North, and that he expects another good meeting with Kim Jong-un soon, where there is much potential. After a long stalemate between the two sides, North Korea's point man on nuclear negotiations with the U.S., Kim Jong-un, flew over to Washington to resume their high-level talks. And after President Trump met with him, the White House announced that the second North Korea-U.S. summit will take place at the end of February. Working-level talks followed right after in Sweden, where officials are thought to have discussed the denuclearization negotiations and other details for the upcoming summit. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also showed high hopes for the summit in his interview with Fox News days earlier in the week. He said there are many conversations going on and that Kim Jong-un continues to assure President Trump that he is intent on denuclearization. And when the two leaders get together, Pompeo said he hopes to make substantial steps towards that. He added that they knew this was going to be a long process and that the first two steps of stopping the North's testing of missile programs and nuclear bombs still continue. 이지원, Arirang News.
For more, we have joining us today Dr. Go Myung-hyun, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So President Trump took to Twitter to rail against what he calls fake news media, as he likes to say, that said little had been achieved at the first summit with Kim Jong-un. So he talked up his successes instead as well, and he said he expects another good meeting with Kim Jong-un, adding that there's much potential. So he seems to be desperate to put a positive spin on things going on with North Korea. But how do you assess the mood between the US and North Korea right now?
Well, I think it's generally positive. I mean, the major stumbling block in the dialogue between the two countries has been the absence of progress in terms of meetings and agreements. And now at least we have a general agreement between the two countries to hold the second summit. So that actually removed a major stumbling block. It's not a normal situation, though. I mean, it's not the second summit is not happening on the basis of an agreement between the staffers on both sides that agreed on the details of denuclearization. We're talking about, in a way, meeting for meeting's sake. But in any way, so it's a progress, and I think both sides are pretty satisfied with that for now.
If that's the case, then Trump, obviously, he's defending his position. Do you think, what are the reasons his critics have put against him? They're saying that so far what he's done has not been that much. And is it slightly, perhaps, unfair on Donald Trump as well?
Well, in a way, both critics and Donald Trump have reasons to believe that they're right. In terms of critics, the expectation going into the first summit last year was that North Korea and the United States would agree on a general roadmap for denuclearization, which didn't happen. And instead, we got the return of our wartime remains and the release of hostages and a general pledge by North Korea to refrain from carrying out further nuclear and missile tests, which they had done that anyways. And on the part of Donald Trump, President Trump, it's been a success in a way. In the sense that North Korea has been behaving well, has really, even though he hasn't really carried out concrete steps towards denuclearization, has refrained from creating instability in the region, and also it's actually committed to the dialogue with the United States. So in a way, we can argue that this is a glass half full or half empty kind of a situation.
Perhaps Trump got a little bit of leeway of having the glass half full kind of argument, if you look at it. But this time, with the next summit, there's going to be pressure on him to really come up with some sort of results, more substantial anyway than the first summit. But what we're getting out of these reports and rumors around Washington is that we could be looking at a small deal rather than like a complete denuclearization deal that some might have hoped for.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. But we have to be realistic about the prospect of reaching a comprehensive deal regarding North Korea's denuclearization. And the idea of a CVID, or complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear capability, is actually a very complex process. And it cannot be done in a span of 1 or 2 years. It takes multiple years, maybe decades. So in the sense that in order to keep up the momentum of dialogue and progress in denuclearization, it's a good idea to reach a small deal, quote unquote, between the two countries. So lower the expectation for now. And the possible small deal between the United States and North Korea at this juncture could mean that North Korea carries out what they promised to do before, such as shutting down the Yongbyon nuclear plant, and then also shutting down the Punggye-ri and Dongchang-ri test sites in exchange for the United States agreeing to relax some of the sanctions measures. But then in this case, it will be a serious relaxation and could possibly involve either of the joint inter-Korean economic projects. One is the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and the other will be the Mount Keungang Tourism Project. But given the presence of existence of sanctions measures against both projects, but then relatively speaking, the Mount Keungang project is actually much more flexible in terms of relaxing sanctions against it. So it's possible that the United States might offer North Korea that it will allow South Korea to resume the Mount Keungang tourism project. So that's a broad sketch of a possible small deal that could be happening in the second summit.
There seems to be pressure for both North Korea and Trump to get some sort of result from this next potential summit, because obviously North Korea's economy is in dire straits, and any kind of easing of sanctions would perhaps help their economy. Then Trump, he's also facing a lot of pressure over domestic issues that are happening in the US right now. So do you think that kind of forces them to make these kind of smaller deals and smaller compromises, and to have at least some sort of deal rather than nothing at all right now?
Well, that's definitely true. But on the other hand, we have to understand that whereas the political constraints or political difficulties that President Trump is facing are real, and then his political position is apparently getting more precarious by the day. But I think the North Koreans' calculation could be a little bit different, because the cycle of political cycle in the United States is actually it actually happens in terms of months rather than years, whereas the economic deterioration in North Korea actually takes place in the span of years. So in that sense, North Korea has more of a wiggling room to wait and recalculate their position. And we have to think again about what will be North Korea's calculation if President Trump faces a serious political challenge at home. And North Korea might think that making a serious offer to President Trump right now will be actually useless, because if there's a successor to President Trump this year because he gets impeached, then the new president in the United States might actually cancel whatever agreement that's reached between President Trump and North Korea. So that might actually incentivize North Korea not to extend concrete denuclearization concessions, but instead minimize the concessions to see whether the situation in the United States actually gets stabilized. Then the North Korea might be ready to resume the negotiation with the new administration in the United States. So this is a very important factor to consider when in order to assess whether North Korea will be serious about making serious concession at the second summit.
It seemed earlier this week that there was also further pressure mounting on President Trump after a report came out from a US think tank that unveiled details of a, quote, undeclared North Korean nuclear missile base. But actually, we have known about this missile base before. So is it fair that Trump gets pressure because of this missile base? Or is it something that we should also understand that it's not really a new revelation as such?
Well, I think the research findings by the U.S. think tank CSIS is probably meant to remind the educated audience in the United States and other countries that North Korea's missile and nuclear programs are ongoing and actually still expanding. So in that sense, it's a very valuable research. But on the other hand, you're right that these are known facilities, and North Korea has never made a pledge to shut them down. So in that sense, North Korea is not violating or deceiving anybody. But this is actually a good piece of research in the sense that North Korea's capability is real, it's still developing, and this is actually should remind President Trump that there's also a clock ticking in that regard, that if we don't do anything, we still just keep the sanctions against North Korea, that might actually not lead to anywhere in terms of solving the North Korean problem.
And not just reminding Donald Trump, but reminding the world really that North Korea really does still have a lot of developing nuclear weapons, and that is the reason why these talks are necessary. Let me move on to South Korea's perspective as well, because South Korea's foreign minister gave an interview while she was in the World Economic Forum in Davos, and she said concrete pledges will be needed for the next Trump-Kim summit. Now, that's seems to be putting quite a lot of pressure on Trump and Kim. Why do you think she said this now?
I think Minister Kang just, essentially stated what I've just stated, that actually acknowledged the fact that both countries are facing serious constraints. North Korea has to decide whether to make a deal now rather than later, given the political uncertainty that's growing in the United States. And then she's also stating the fact that President Trump should actually be aware of the fact that North Korea is still developing missile and nuclear programs, and it's better to reach a deal sooner rather than later. So I think it's just acknowledging the reality on the ground rather than putting pressure on either side.
But having a third party, South Korea, who's involved heavily in this, to make these kind of comments, though, is perhaps doesn't really need to be said at this point.
Well, but this is actually it's a very important opportunity for South Korea to, be transparent about its policy thinking. And I think, at least from my point of view, she did a good job of reminding the world that the South Korea is very conscious of the challenges and opportunities that's being presented in the second US-DPRK summit.
In the interview, she talked about various initial steps that North Korea could take, such as shutting down the Yongbyon nuclear facility as promised before, and allowing inspections of other facilities shutdowns. But she also mentioned that there are many other things that we can do before full denuclearization and sanctions relief. What do you think she meant by these? Do you think she meant other steps, or what other things could we expect?
Well, this is ongoing school of thoughts, especially in South Korea, that we should put more incentive on the table rather than like a pressure to incentivize North Korea to come forward and then carry out the denuclearization promises that he had made before. So I think Minister Kang's remarks probably reflects this thinking that we should strengthen the incentive side of the deal. And then I think the possible incentives that we can do right now without undermining the sanctions would be to expand the humanitarian assistance in North Korea and increase the scale of the assistance. And also, like, promise North Korea that there will be massive economic assistance if North Korea really carries out what he promised to do. So I think that she's referring to that idea of making incentives more strong.
Before we go, let's pivot to the situation also that's happening in China. So a North Korean arts troupe has traveled to Beijing to perform in China for the first time in 3 years. What does this show about the current relationship between North Korea and China? Because this arts troupe performing does have some sort of significance.
Oh, definitely. We have to remember that when the last time the North Korea's art troupe visited Beijing, they actually left before doing their show, and then that's because Chinese authorities were very upset about the fact that North Korea has just carried out a major missile test. So the contrast is actually very stark. And it also shows that the relationship between North Korea and China are very close right now, and that's going to be the case for a foreseeable future. So in that sense, this visit and the success of this visit, it says a lot about the state of the relationship between the two countries.
And Pyongyang does seem to be emphasizing the importance of it, because they've also sent Ri Soo-young, one of the senior most officials of North Korea.
He's a very important person, definitely.
So do you think he'll be able to, do you think he will have some sort of perhaps talks with Beijing officials while he's there as well?
I think he's definitely, I would say he'll be the most well-known mastermind behind the current North Korean strategy and diplomatic strategy. And so therefore what Ri Soo-young is going to say with the Chinese counterparts, it's going to carry a huge weight in determining the future of the relationship between the two countries, as well as the North Korean behavior at the second US-DPRK summit.
Well, Dr. Goh, thank you for coming in today. That's where we're going to wrap things up.
It's my pleasure.
And that's all from me for this week. I'll be back Monday with more in-depth talk on the day's top stories. But our newscasts throughout the weekend will keep you updated on all the latest from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching, and hope you can join us again next time. Goodbye.
January monthly highlight.
Hospitals, they operate much like a listed.
Get all the news happening in and out of Korea. Foreign correspondents bring in different journalists from all over the world to sit down and discuss the most recent issues, while revealing behind stories as well as their own personal opinions regarding the events. From exclusive backstories and more, understand current affairs through the engaging conversations and debates on